guess somewhere along the line I figured that since I'd gotten married later in life that I was entitled to a long and happy marriage, and I just never would have, and I always say it was my worst nightmare to lose Stan, but when the nightmare actually happened, it was 10,000 times worse than I could have imagined.
Hello, my name is Bill Webster, and I would like to welcome you to this program entitled From Morning to Dawn. I realize that you may be watching this video at a very difficult time in your life. Perhaps someone you care about has died, or you have experienced a significant loss. Possibly you find yourself struggling to cope with many emotions and finding it difficult to come to terms with what has happened. Probably you would rather be doing anything else in the world than watching a video on grief. I can identify with some of these feelings because I myself experienced a significant loss. In 1983, my wife Carolyn died suddenly and unexpectedly. Carolyn was just a young woman, and we had no idea that there was any serious medical problem. We'd been married for 11 years. Our two boys at the time were only 9 and 7. When she collapsed and was taken by ambulance to the hospital, I don't think I realized how serious the situation was. Driving myself to the hospital that morning, I just assumed everything would be okay. When I arrived at the hospital, however, the doctor took me into a little room. There, in just 4 words, he told me something that would change my life forever. Your wife has died. It seemed unbelievable and unacceptable. It just didn't seem real. It felt like a bad dream. I thought at any minute I would wake up and realize to my relief that it wasn't really happening. Throughout the following days, I felt like I was in a fog. People at the funeral told me I was doing well and thought it was wonderful that I was so strong. But in fact, I wasn't strong. I was numb. And the problem was that a few months after Carolyn's death, the numbness wore off, and I began to experience an explosion of emotions and uncharacteristic feelings in reaction to my loss. People by that time, of course, thought I should be getting over it, and kept telling me that life must go on. I began to realize one of the dilemmas of grief. Sometimes it is when people think you should be getting yourself together, you feel like you are falling apart. Not only did I feel like I was coming apart, I felt I wasn't living up to people's expectations of how well I should be doing. And that made me feel even worse. But when Carolyn died, I also lost something else that I think you may be able to identify with. When we were married, like most people, we had hopes and dreams of living happily ever after. While all of us know that life is never perfect, we all hope it will work out in a way that is meaningful or that makes sense. We know that tragedies occur, but somehow that happens to other people, not to us. Sometimes life doesn't work out as we expect. Robert Burns, in his well-known poem To a Mouse, wrote, "The best laid schemes o' mice and men gang after gley, and leave us naught but grief and pain for promised joy." So when Carolyn died, I felt like I had lost not only my wife and the mother of our children, I had also to try to come to terms with the grief of my unmet expectations. I struggled to believe what seemed unbelievable and to accept what was unacceptable. It felt at that time like many of the hopes and dreams I had held of the way my life would be were shattered and broken forever. I now know that what I was experiencing was grief. We're going to talk about this grief journey from morning to dawn and try to find some directions and encouragement for those on that difficult path. To help me, I'd like to introduce you to some people. They're not actors. They are real people who, like you, have suffered a significant loss. People like Margaret.
My husband was Irish, and he really had the gift of the gab. He could talk about anything to anybody, no matter what nationality, creed, religion, race. He was a rock that I depend on. He was always there for me. He was there for everyone. He was a salesman. He was a nice person to everyone. We had 2 children, and he just thought the sun rose and shone on those children. I really don't know why he died. The doctors have no reason other to say that. They think his heart just suddenly gave out. He had never been sick. He had only been in hospital twice, and that was kidney stones. He never went to a doctor. At Father's Day, we were in a drugstore, and I got him to do blood pressure reading and found it was high. And he went to the doctor, and all that was wrong with Jim was he had high cholesterol. I finished work at 4:30, and most nights he was there waiting on me at 4:30. And this night he never came and never came and never came. And I phoned my daughter, and she came and got me. And when we went home, the police were at the door to tell us he had died. And that was the end of my husband. That's my story.
Julie lost her 10-year-old daughter and also her best friend in a tragic automobile accident. Wayne and Kelly have a similar story to tell.
Our loss was our daughter. 15 months ago in a vehicle accident. There was also injuries with the rest of the family, but the main one was the loss of Whitney. I can remember saying to them, that vehicle is going too fast, that truck's going way too fast. And the next thing you know, it was on us. And I actually forgot that she was there. And I felt really bad about that I didn't hear her. And it was after that trying to get myself out of my seatbelt and the boys, and realizing that one of them was injured and there was blood, that they realized that Whitney wasn't there. And they said, "Mom, Whitney." And they panicked and they ran to the back of the van and tried to lift it off of her. And at that time, I just knew she was gone. But I kept trying to tell myself it wasn't that way.
I can remember going through my mind is that this isn't happening to me. This happens to other people. And one of the things I can remember is, I don't know if it's the right words or not, but it was almost like I had given up on Whitney. And the next person that came to my mind was Kevin, because I know that he had a very serious injury. He was the next person that was most in my mind. The other thing I remember now is it was a mistake I made. Was I didn't pay as much attention to my other son as I should have, only because he wasn't physically hurt. He's probably the most wounded psychologically of all of us at the moment. And I think it was that very moment that I didn't think about all the things that he was witnessing or trying to console him or anything else. Basically relating everything to physical injuries first.
Jerry lost his best friend and found that many people didn't understand the significance and depth of his loss. Sandra lost her sister and found it was not given much importance.
Well, my sister lives in England. She's 12 years older than myself. And I didn't know that she was ill at all. And one day, out of the blue, I get a phone call to say that she has died. It was just unbelievable to me because I hadn't heard the family My other family over there hadn't mentioned anything about her being sick, and it was her wish that I had enough to cope with in life, so she didn't want me to be told.
Anne and Mark found the sudden death of their father very difficult to cope with. Maria's situation, though difficult, was quite different.
My son Stefan was 9 years old. He passed away in November. He had cystic fibrosis. He had lung disease. He was very outgoing. He was very energetic. He was on a waiting list for a double lung transplant, but he passed away before suitable donor was found. Stefan was very outgoing. He was very intellectual. He was very mature for his age. He's been dealing with his disease since he was 6 weeks old. He's been dealing with doctors and nurses and medical conditions and scientific facts for years and years, and he took it all in stride. He believed in living his life to the fullest. Stefan never wanted the double lung transplant. He couldn't accept getting organs from someone dying and him benefiting from it. And we spoke to him countless times about it. And I said to him, but you did the assessment for the lung transplant, which was very, very hard. And he said he did it for me because it's what I wanted. But he told me that he didn't want a lung transplant. He wouldn't wait. And I said, why? And he said, because he didn't want anybody else to die so that he could live. And he says, I'm meant to die. I'm ready. My family's ready. I should die. And sure enough, he told me he would wait 3 days. And he died on the 3rd day.
Bob had a very close relationship with his wife of 44 years. And after she died, he felt as if his life made a right-hand turn. Mary's experience was similar.
My husband, Stan, died 2 years ago this month of cancer. He was a very strong person, and I'm a strong person, and I knew that I couldn't push him around, and I like that. He was also an extremely kind person, very, very compassionate and understanding. And I felt in Stan I'd sort of met a refuge and a haven. And boy, even 2 years later, I just miss him so much because we did everything together. And I guess somewhere along the line I figured that since I'd gotten married later in life that I was entitled to a long and happy marriage. And I just never would have, I always say it was my worst nightmare to lose Stan. But when the nightmare actually happened, it was 10,000 times worse than I could have imagined.
Part of the difficulty with grief is that we do not know what to expect after a significant loss, so its intensity often catches us by surprise. Margaret Mead has said, when someone is born, we rejoice. When someone is married, we celebrate. But when someone dies, we pretend that nothing has happened. Many people, shortly after a loss, find that there can be a conspiracy of silence. No one wants to talk about it or validate the difficult experience we feel we are going through. So what is grief, and how does it affect us? Let me suggest a definition of grief. Grief is the normal yet bewildering cluster of ordinary emotions arising in response to a significant loss, intensified and complicated by the relationship we have lost. Let's see what we can learn about grief from this definition. Grief isn't a disease or a sickness. Grief is actually a normal response to a significant loss. Sometimes after a loss, people say, you mustn't cry, or you mustn't grieve. Or the ultimate guilt trip, your loved one wouldn't want you to cry. I want you to know I've left specific instructions for my family. If something ever happens to me, somebody had better cry. I mean, how awful it would be if someone we cared about died, and we went on as if nothing had happened. We didn't shed a tear. We didn't have a reaction. No. Something has happened that's very significant, And I think we need to address that and to say that grief is normal.
I've always been very close with my father. I'm the youngest and I'm the only girl, so I was, Daddy's little girl. And my dad's just always been there for me. He was always ready to fix something, and I would always call out, "Dad, can you do?" And he was always, what now, sort of thing. But he was always ready to do things for me. The thing I miss the most, I guess the biggest memory and that I'll always cherish is the fact that he always used to open the door. He'd hear us pull in the driveway and he'd open the door and he'd be there to greet us. And I still come home expecting him to be behind the door, but it doesn't open.
The second key fact about grief and grieving is that the worst kind of loss is yours. We've come together from many different places, many different environments. We represent quite a wide range of loss. Sometimes people say to me, what's the worst kind of loss? Is it worse to lose a spouse, or is it worse to lose a child? Well, the reality is there's no such thing as more or less difficult. No loss is more difficult. Every loss is different. That's the only distinction. Your loss is probably the worst thing that could have happened to you, and therefore the worst kind of loss is yours.
Reg's death occurred in the spring, and I think for the first 2 months, maybe even the whole summer, I really just felt numb, and I knew that he had died, and went through all the things that I had to do, but it really wasn't until the fall that it all of a sudden hit me that the winter's coming, and normally now we'd starting to do things together, and Reg isn't here. Or there were certain things that were happening in my life that I needed some guidance on, and Reg wasn't there in the fall. So it was, 3 or 4 months later that it all of a sudden hit me that I don't have a best friend anymore.
Yes, I don't think that enough importance is put on the loss of a sister or a sibling. And really, you've known, for myself, I grew up with my sister and knew her till I was, 50 years of age. So she'd always been there. So when she died, it was very much like losing a part of me. And because she was a sister, and we grew up together, and we were had done things together, and she had always been there. Even her daughter said to me a little later on, when she saw how upset I was over my sister's death, she said, I have to realize that you've known, my mother longer than I have.
Some of you know that I have a particular passion in my life. And my passion is for these little things that we call chocolate rocher nut clusters. These are so delicious. I don't know if you've ever thought about it, but here I have 16 nut clusters in this box. And we're going to enjoy these in a few moments. But you know what? There are 16 of them in the box. But every single nut cluster is just a little bit different. Oh, they're all made of the same basic ingredients. Every nut cluster begins with a hazelnut at the center, surrounded by that wonderful whipped hazelnut chocolate cream, encased in a wafer biscuit, smothered with milk chocolate, sprinkled with nuts. It looks like you'd like to have one now. Every nut cluster has the same basic ingredients. And yet if I were to open this one, what we would find is that every nut cluster is just a little bit different. Because some of them are round and some of them are a little bit off shape. Some of them have a few holes here and there. Some of them have a few extra nuts sprinkled. Some of them have an extra blob of chocolate on top. Nut clusters. Same basic ingredients, and yet every one unique and just a little bit different. Well, now you may be asking yourself, why is he talking to us about nut clusters? For this reason, grief is very much like a nut cluster. But while every nut cluster is made of the same basic ingredients, everyone is just a little bit different. They're all unique. You've had a loss. What you're experiencing, we can identify as grief, but you are going to be able to identify your particular cluster of emotions. Everyone's different. Even here in our group, we're all different. We're male and female. We come from different cultural backgrounds. Our losses are different. Every situation is unique. We're experiencing grief, but everyone is experiencing it in a different way. While it is good to understand grief, to know that it is a natural, albeit a very difficult and often intense process, it is also very important to remember that grief is not just a thing of the head, it is a matter of the heart. Thus, it is an important statement to say, the focus of grief is not on our ability to understand, but on our ability to feel. We're going to examine and illustrate the many emotions of grief. I don't know if you've ever had this experience. Maybe it's only we men who do this kind of thing. I don't know. Have you ever been in the kitchen and you're slicing a tomato or peeling a potato, and suddenly the knife slips and you cut your finger? Think about that experience. There's the ouch moment. Ouch, I've cut myself. And you look at the finger and you think, yep, it's cut. But for a minute or two it doesn't bleed, and actually for a minute or two it doesn't really hurt. 30 minutes after we cut ourselves or injure ourselves, the cut may be aching and throbbing far more than it was at the time that we did it. Now think about that experience. The ouch moment, and then the numbness, and then the pain and the aching and so on. Why doesn't our finger hurt right away? It's because we have in our system something known as endorphins. These are the body's natural anesthetic. These immediately rush to the spot. We don't feel the pain right away. It dulls the pain until a little later on when it becomes a little more manageable. I believe in a similar way we respond emotionally. Someone we care about dies. There's that ouch moment. We feel the pain. There's the shock of what has happened. But then sometimes we feel quite numb. It's almost as if we're not feeling any emotions. We may go through the time of the funeral. People think we're strong, but in fact, we're numb. We're in shock.
I still haven't got over the shock yet. As much as I love my husband, we were married for 30-odd years, I cannot remember him, which worries me. The doctors say that my body has gone into total shock. It might take a while before I come out of this and start to remember him.
A few months after my wife's death, that numbness began to wear off. I began to experience what I can only describe as an avalanche of emotions. It was like the feelings inside of me exploded, and I found myself coping with many, many unusual and uncharacteristic reactions.
I lost a lot of sleep, couldn't concentrate. I was continuously thinking about her. She was continuously on my mind. I just felt that I'd never stop really crying about it. And I still cry now, but it's not nearly as bad as it was in the beginning.
Oh, I have no I'm sorry, what was that word? No, I have no concentration. I can't remember what people talk to me about or tell me. I go to do something and I just completely forget what I'm going to do.
I found out that the numbness that I felt where I was walking around in a daze, where I would start doing something and shift over to something else, wasn't unique for me. It was a common occurrence. That the feeling of sadness that might come over me was quite normal. I wasn't ready to be taken away somewhere. That what was happening to me was quite standard, and that there was no time on it. That it might happen today, and it might not happen again for another few weeks.
I just didn't think it would ever happen to me. I would never be the one saying that my dad died. Confused, very anxious and irritable. I get very, it's like I wanted to talk about what happened, and on the other side of it, I didn't want to talk to anybody. I didn't want to talk to my friends. I wanted to stay to myself. I didn't want to go out. Didn't want to go in any social gatherings because I just didn't feel like it. I didn't want to tell the story, and I didn't want anybody feeling sorry for me. I guess feelings of lonely. Even when you're not alone, you're still lonely. You can still be lonely in a crowd, they say. And I guess I was looking for my dad and feeling lost.
I panic a lot, even in work. If I can't do things right away, I panic that I'm losing control of everything. I have no stability at the moment in my life. I just feel I'm living in a vacuum. So someday he will come back to me and my life will go back to normal. Deep down, I know that that will never happen, but I keep on believing that it will.
Just her personality, her cuddling, being able to spend the time with her, being that it was the only girl, did a few things together, shopping together. I found it really hard to go out at Christmas time to shop. It was something Whitney loved to do, loved to dress up, and I missed that part of not being able to go and buy the little girl things. Although I have nieces to do that for, I find it's very hard to do it. And, I always think, what would Whitney do? What would Whitney like? And I find that is what I really miss is just having her there, knowing what she'd be like right now.
You see, as far as, I'm concerned, my father was one of the most important people in my life. And if there's not one person in my life that I can shed a tear for or cry for, it's my dad. And, there's a lot of stereotypes and stuff that go through society where they think men have to be strong and we're not allowed to express emotions and things like that. But I beg to differ. I think that being able to kind of get them out every once in a while is a lot better than trying to live your life keeping them in.
It is, still is very hard. I find there's no one to go home to at night to talk things over with. There is no companionship. It's lonely. We have a lot of friends, but I have no one to go on vacation with, no one to take me to a movie. Silly, stupid things, but sometimes I can't accept the fact that he has gone. I come home at nights and I still expect he'll come whistling in the house to me and call me and tell me he's home. I really find it very lonely.
I can be in a room with 50 people and feel so totally alone. When I'm alone, I want to be with people, and when I'm with people, I want to be alone. When I'm at home, I wish I could go out, and when I go out, I can't wait to come back home. I'm searching. I'm missing something, and I know it's Stefan, but I'm somehow trying to fill in that need, that missing part, and I don't know how.
The first feeling was anger. I was very angry. when I found out Nicola was dead and my other friends in the car, my son was injured. I was very, very angry. I couldn't understand why this had to happen to me. There was lots of other people on the road. Why me? The second feeling I dealt with afterwards was the guilt. I blamed myself. I asked myself, why did it happen to me? I was feeling guilty because I tried to think of what I could have done to prevent it. What if I stayed longer in the store that evening? We were in the store to pick up a birthday card. What if we stayed a few minutes longer? What if we picked Anne up first instead of Chris? Would we have taken a different direction out to Plattsville that night? All the what ifs, I asked myself, all the whys. I felt very guilty about it.
The guilt feeling, I went into this complete downward spiral of convincing myself that at some level, Stan must not have been happy in the marriage. He must have not expressed it to me, because else why did he die of cancer?
I remember the father of a parish asking me how angry was I. And I said anger hadn't even really crossed my mind yet. And I kind of think that probably has to go back to due to the numbness or whatever my mind had switched off to other emotions. But the anger has grown inside me. One thing is that I can't change what's happened. I find that the most almost frustrating and I'm just angry at myself that I can't go back and change that day for whatever reason.
Anger, I felt a lot of anger. I felt cheated. I was angry because I honestly believed in faith. I believed in myself. I believed in the medical system, the healthcare system. Not that they let me down, because I understand intellectually, I understand that there was not a cure for CF. But I felt let down because I couldn't change the end result for my son. So there is a lot of anger. It's been misdirected. It's been very much misdirected towards my husband, towards my family, towards my friends. I'm hoping that I can come to deal with my anger and turn around and use it more productively. I would like to use the venom and the force of that anger to change something for CF or for any other grieving parents or children out there. I need to redirect that anger and turn it into something positive.
Perhaps one of the reasons why grief is so difficult is that we haven't really understood what is normal. Although we know grief is not a sickness, many expect it to work itself out like one. For example, if I get a sore throat, I know I'm going to feel pretty miserable for a few days, but then slowly the pain will lessen and I will start to feel better. Some people think grief should be the same. They expect the first few days or weeks will be ones of intense pain and sadness, but then in a very predictable and orderly way, I should pull myself together and get back to normal. But in fact, right after a loss, a person may feel numb. People often confuse that numbness with strength. And when the numbness wears off, life can become very difficult. Even then, grief is unpredictable. It comes and goes. One day you feel okay, a bit stronger, doing better. But the next day you can't stop crying, and you feel worse than you did before. We call this experience grief attacks. Perhaps one of the best images I can give you of grief is that grief is very much like a roller coaster. One day we're up, and the next day we're down. We're up for a while, we're down for a while. We seem to be doing fine, and then we're in the depths of despair. We come up, and then we coast for a little while. We just seem to be in between, and then down into the depths and back up again. You've been on a roller coaster, you know exactly what it's like with all its ups and downs. That, I think, is how grief often works itself out. Grief isn't always consistent. Grief comes and goes. Sometimes we're up and sometimes we're down. We can experience many grief attacks. They can be triggered by many, many things. In fact, anything that reminds us of our loved one can trigger a grief attack. And hey, just about everything reminds us of our loved one. There are so many memories. There are so many significant articles. There are so many significant days. In fact, grief attacks are often triggered by special days and anniversaries, birthdays, wedding anniversaries. Christmas, of course, triggers a massive grief attack in many people because Christmas, traditionally the season to be jolly, and this year we're not feeling jolly because someone we care about isn't with us any longer. And Christmas comes and we realize afresh that the person isn't going to be there. There isn't going to be a gift for them under the tree or a gift from them under the tree. And we miss them perhaps more at Christmas than at any other time. But there are so many occasions. Valentine's Day, Mother's Day, Father's Day. And sometimes they're not just as obvious. Sometimes it's the family reunion. Sometimes it's the first day to go on vacation, that holiday weekend when we would have been coming together. Sometimes it's a year ago today day. Sometimes people will say that it's not just the day itself that's difficult, but the time around that day. Sometimes we brace ourselves and go through the day, but then a week after or a week before, it can be very difficult for us. We experience a grief attack. We're suddenly overwhelmed again by missing the person. When people don't understand the concept of grief attacks, they look at us and they say, "Gee, what's wrong with you? You were doing so well last week. You were up, you were strong, you seem to be handling it, and now look at you."
Well, initially, every minute of the day, it was like torment, Bill. I would wake up and it was just like you'd have that split second where you'd wake up and then you'd remember, and it was like a ton of bricks landed on you and that gut-wrenching feeling in your stomach and like, oh, the reality of, you know, my life. And I tried to think of something that didn't make me think of Stan. I thought, I had a life before I married Stan. I taught high school, but I couldn't think of anything that didn't boomerang back to him. And it was like, I say, it was just like torment. Definitely the first anniversary of everything. Like the first year, I just lurched from anniversary to anniversary, but every day was a first. The first day of school, when the kids went back to school, the last day of school, like the first parent-teacher interview, our first wedding anniversary, right up to it's interesting, he died in March, the 1st of March. And even if you weren't consciously thinking, subconsciously it would catch up with you. The first day, every Tuesday was difficult for me because he died on a Tuesday. The first time Tuesday and the 28th of a month coincided. I just felt rotten all day.
Shortly after Stefan died, I would have 2-3 good days, and I'd be a mess for a week. And the intervals sort of over time have gotten further apart. The anniversary of Stefan's death is every month, the 9th comes along, and I dedicate that day to just staying home and remembering and crying and feeling that pain. Certain situations, certain holidays. Valentine's Day was a very hard day for me. It was the one day that we dedicated to Stefan. We used to have a Valentine's Day dance to raise money for CF. Mother's Day is going to be equally as devastating because Mother's Day will be Stefan's 10th birthday. Christmas, going to the cemetery to wish my baby a Merry Christmas was devastating. Grief attacks are a very big part of having a loss.
I actually had a grief attack just about 2 weeks after my father passed away. And I'd gone to a craft show, and I saw a banana hanger. Those little things that you hang bananas up so they stay off the off the working surface. And I lost it. I just got stricken with this. I was crying and crying. I couldn't stop. I couldn't breathe. And my mother was with me, and she felt the same way. And it was, to anybody else, they would have not understood why this silly little kitchen ornament sort of thing would trigger this. And it was because my father, only days before, had sketched out a design. He was going to make one for us for the kitchen. And it just kind of made me think of that. And songs, I hear a song on the radio, and it just throws me right off. And it doesn't matter where I am. I can be in the grocery store. I can be in line somewhere. I'll be at the bank. And it just hits. And it's not even anything you can control. It just comes like a wave. And as quickly as it comes, it leaves just as fast.
Sometimes we're tempted to think that when we're at the top of the roller coaster, we're doing well. And when we're at the bottom of the roller coaster, we're not doing so well. In fact, I like to reverse that. Sometimes when we're up, it's as if we're taking a break from our grief. And when we're down in the depths, it's because we're working through our feelings. We're missing the person. We're coming to terms with the reality. I know it'll be a very small encouragement that when you're down, you're actually doing well. Sometimes we think when we're up, we're strong. When we're down, we're weak. In fact, it may be just the reverse. A small encouragement the next time you're having a grief attack. But hey, sometimes any encouragement is worth it. How do we get over a significant loss? There is a sense in which we don't get over something like this. We go through it. It hurts to lose someone you care about or to experience any significant loss. People may tell us to be strong or not to cry. But to say it doesn't hurt would be totally unrealistic. Admittedly, no one likes pain. While we often say, no pain, no gain, if we can avoid it or find an easier way, most of us will. How we can work through the many challenges of this situation is our next focus. So how do we work through some of these emotions? How do we work through these feelings? How do we cope when it feels like our life is falling apart and we're experiencing this avalanche and explosion of unusual and uncharacteristic things? I believe that one of the concepts that is most helpful in this whole area is to think about grief work as tasks. One of the things I believe we need to do is to relive our memories. We talked a few minutes ago about repetition and how it almost seems like we have this VCR in our head that replays the tapes of the relationship. I think we need to encourage that. I think we need to facilitate that. Let me share something with you that I find very special and very meaningful. This is a memory box. Some people use a shoebox. This happens to be a little more fancy. And in my memory box, I have a number of very significant and important articles. This may seem like a very strange memory to bring, to show you. But actually, this was the first gift that Carolyn ever purchased for me. I don't know if you can see the strange little dog, and at the bottom it says, "So what if I ain't good looking? I'm faithful." And so can you imagine, she'd just gone back to Canada, and she sends me this for that very first Christmas. This was kind of cute, but it was actually very significant and very special. Some of you have brought some items and some significant memories with you. Memories talk to us about the significance of the past. We remember things that occurred. We remember special things about the person. The memories, in many ways, are important. We have to relive the memories. You may say, well, why? Why can't I just forget? It hurts so much to think about the person. The reason we have to relive the memories is because the memories are helping us to learn. Learn what, you may say? Memories help us to learn what life is like now that the significant person has died. We think back on what life was like, and that in many ways helps us to prepare for the adjustments. We're learning that the person is no longer present, the person is no longer here. They're still very much a part of our lives. They still have a significant place in our lives, but the relationship has changed. The relationship is no longer one of presence, it's one of memory. And the way that we accomplish that is by reliving our memories.
I can remember the morning of the accident. We just come back from holidays, Christmas holidays, visiting everybody. We just got in late the night before. And I can remember debating with Kelly whether we should stop to visit nephews and nieces that we hadn't taken the time to visit. We decided to stop and visit. We'd gotten in late the night before, and that morning I was trying to be quiet to go out the door and not wake anybody up. And I can remember I'm sitting at the breakfast table and I can hear Whitney's feet coming towards me. And I can remember the reaction of myself was that, you know, I'm angry at myself, the fact that I had made so much noise that I woke Whitney up. And I can remember Whitney giving me this big hug and a big smile. And then I can remember saying, why don't you go climb back into bed with Mom? And I can remember just as quickly as she came out, that she went back in. And she got back into bed with Kelly. And it's one of the things that I'll always cherish through some of the journeys and experiences I've talked to other people. They say how they're angry with themselves because the last thing they remember with the people that died was that they had an argument, or they didn't get that kiss, or they said something terrible. But I look at what Kelly or Whitney and I shared that morning. I'll always be able to carry that with me for the rest of my life.
The other important task in this season of avoidance is to work through our feelings. You may say, well, we're having all these feelings and these emotions. Of course we're working them through. Can I suggest to you for a moment that sometimes what people do is to encourage us to keep our feelings under control. Try not to feel it. Try to move away from the pain. Try not to think about it. It's almost as if people want to put a lid on the feelings. I fear that sometimes we have come to regard feelings as the enemy. And I've got to get them under control. And I've got to put them down. And I can't let them overwhelm me. Can I suggest to you, however, that maybe feelings are our friends? Maybe they're trying to say something to us. Maybe they're trying to teach us something. I believe that the many emotions of grief are trying to teach us about life, about ourselves, about how life is different. I believe we need to work with those feelings.
I think the best thing for me to share with anyone, in my personal opinion, in my experience, is that in order to ever get through a loss, and I don't think we ever fully recover from this. Never will I ever fully recover from the death of my son. But I will get through my grief till the day that should come that I could look back on all my memories and all our good times with no pain and no more tears. If I could ever reach that day that I could look back on my son's life with good memories and fond memories, then it's worth all the pain and all the tears that I'm going through now.
A large part of our grief work is adjusting to a new environment in which the lost relationship is missing. Of course, the adjustments are different for everyone. Your situation is unique, and so your adjustments will be distinct according to the changes this loss has created. For example, there may be many practical adjustments. For me, one of the practical changes in my life was having to do all the cooking and housekeeping. Margaret's practical adjustments in her situation were different.
The problem I found was the the financial end, the worries and troubles you have getting the banks and insurance companies and mortgage companies to listen to your side of the story, and trying to get all the bank accounts straightened out. I would encourage people that are married that if one of the spouses isn't too familiar with the financial end of the household, to make themselves available to do that. I never learned to drive, and my husband took me everywhere. We went everywhere together, and now he is no longer here. And with me not driving, I find it very difficult. I don't like imposing on people to drive me places and to do things for me. Eventually, I might get my driver's license, depending on my state of mind.
There may also be social adjustments as we adjust to a new way of relating to others.
I always felt that, it was always the boys would do their hockey, and Whitney and I would do the skating, and that was our thing, and it was the girl thing and the boy thing. And I don't have that opportunity. I could be involved in the skating, but it isn't the same. It's not being there to share with her and watch her develop. That was something I used to do, and I shared with her, and I don't have that to share with her anymore. And I miss that.
Often we experience emotional adjustments and physical adjustments as we come to terms with what one person described so well, the absence of presence. But we can also struggle to cope with perceptual adjustments as we sense that people are somehow looking at us through different eyes.
Being able to get up every morning and wash my face and take care of just me is a luxury I never had. And I feel guilty because I have it. Being able to do things now for myself because I couldn't do them before is a luxury I never had, and the guilt that comes with it. And also people around me. After Stephen died, this is very important to me because after Stephen died, everyone said to me, oh, your son gave you the best gift. He gave you your life back. You can do anything. Now's the time for you to go out, do all the things that you could never do before. And just recently, I started doing some different things. I took up the game of squash. I'm thinking about going back to school. Things that I feel are beneficial to me because I have this time in order to fill this time. And now everyone's sort of taking a different standpoint. Well, look, she's doing all these things now. So it is quite an adjustment, not only for me because I have the time, but for the people around me to accept that I'm venturing out in different areas.
The biggest thing I always seemed to sit in my mind was people would say, how many children do you have? And your first response is 3. And then you have to think, no, it isn't. But in reality, it is. She's always part of me. And I'll always have that part, even though it is gone.
I still think, gosh, in 5 years, my dad isn't going to be here still. In 10 years, he's still not going to be here. Just knowing that the finality of the whole thing, and that I have to still go on in my life, and I'm going to get married, and he's not going to be able to give me away and see my children. And I suppose that's very difficult to think that he won't be a part of that. I mean, he'll always be a part of me, but he'll never be a part of that. And that is a really big thing for me right now.
And so each of us in our grief journey from morning to dawn arrive at a corner where we must ask ourselves, how is my life different in the light of my loss? And what am I going to do about it? After my wife died, many people, probably with good intentions, tried to give me all kinds of advice. I wasn't always as appreciative as they thought I might be. I wanted to figure this out for myself. I'm sure many of you feel the same. But perhaps you'll permit me to simply offer a few suggestions that might help you through your journey. And the first suggestion is this, that we need to be patient with ourselves. Grief takes time. In fact, grief usually takes longer than most people expect. John Donne once said, "He who has no time to mourn has no time to mend." Perhaps another suggestion would be to give yourself permission to grieve. Often in our culture, we don't receive that permission, do we? People say, be strong, don't cry, life must go on. So I'm not trying to be unkind to anybody. Sometimes when people say that, the message that we receive is, it's not okay to grieve. Or when people say, don't cry. The message to the grieving person is that our feelings are unacceptable. Sometimes when we're going through grief, we feel like we're losing it. You ever use that expression? I feel like I'm losing it. If you feel like you're losing it, yes, you have lost it. But it's important to understand what that it is. You haven't lost your mind. You're not going crazy. You've lost the context in which you've lived your life in the light of this relationship.
There are chances that you can educate other people, and if they do make comments, well, it was just a friend, and you can move on. There are many circumstances where you can say, no, this was my best friend, and I am hurting very much because of it.
I think the greatest lesson I've learned about myself in this grief process is that it's something that you have to go through. No one can take it away from you. You have to feel it in order to get through it. And sometimes, as much as that, you don't think that you'll ever get through the end of the day. And as lonely as you think that you are, and as much as you honestly believe that nobody can imagine how much pain you're going through, you can only get through it by feeling it and going through it by yourself. That's what I've really learned. You have nobody else to count on. Nobody could take it away from you. You have to feel it. You have to go through it.
Be aware of your limitations. Especially during the early days after a loss, we may find that our concentration is affected. And so be careful. Watch out if you're driving the car. Your whole mind may not be focused on what you're doing. There's been many people who've come to the grief groups and who've said, you know what, I drove through a red light, or I did something that I just wasn't thinking. Well, be aware of those situations. If you're working with machinery, using a lawnmower, any simple thing, it's not really simple, is it? Because our concentration is affected, and we've got to recognize the situations that may affect us and that may be difficult.
I have learned I am strong in some aspects and very weak in others. I am very raw to people talking about my husband. Some of them won't mention his name, as just as if he never existed. And I want them to talk about it sometimes because I think it does me some good. I will make this. My background dictates I will be strong and I will get over this and try and make another life for myself.
You're going through a very difficult experience. You're going through one of the hardest processes of life. So try to be good to yourself. Take a break from your grief once in a while.
One of the things that I notice about myself now is I'm not self-conscious about myself. What I do is I look at people I deal with in business, sport, pleasure, whatever, and I take them for what they are. I'm not worried about what they could be, what I think they should be, how can I control them. what I do is I really find myself influencing, talking to myself now, how can I make a difference with this person, try to make them feel better? How can I not tear them apart, but how can I build them up? What I found is that a lot of situations in life you can't control, but you can influence, maybe a play on words. But what I do is I try and make sure that every day that I have to live now, I try and live it to its fullest, and try and provide my family with as much as I can.
Ask for and accept help. Sometimes that can be difficult, can't it? Sometimes it's hard to ask for help because we really don't know what we need. But in fact, sometimes what happens is people mean well, but they don't know what to say. They don't know what to do. And one of the things that happens with people who don't understand grief, they don't want to make a mistake. They don't want to say the wrong thing. They don't want to do the wrong thing. And so sometimes they end up doing and saying nothing, which as far as we're concerned, is sometimes the worst thing they could possibly do. So pick up the phone and say, hey, remember you said if there was anything I could do, not to hesitate to let you know. Well, there is. So I think what we have to do sometimes is to take the initiative to say, okay, I will ask for help. I will accept that help.
When I'm back at the hospital that night with Kevin and actually my mother, I can remember talking to my mother about the thing that concerns me the most about this is whether Kelly and I will survive as a couple. One of the things my mother said was, well, if you're talking about it now, it'll probably keep you together as a couple. And I've always thought about that conversation whenever there's been any discussion about what it's done to Kelly and I as a couple. I don't know whether they're doing anything right or not, but I know at least we talk about it.
Let me suggest to you that grief invites us to remember, not to forget. Grief invites us to remember. See, you and I, as grieving people, don't want to forget the person. In fact, one of the things that drives us crazy about the fact that no one mentions the person's name is that we don't want them to be forgotten. We want their life to be significant. We want them to be remembered. Memories are painful, but they do have a healing quality about them. So grief encourages us to remember and not to forget.
After everything had started to calm down, Stephen was back at school. Things were really slowing down. That's when I felt the reality that she was gone, she wasn't coming back. But I still continued for months after to deal with making sure that everybody was okay, taking care of everybody else. And I just felt overloaded, a tremendous amount of stress and anxiety and worry. And I just couldn't take much more of it, so I had to find the time for myself to look after myself because I found everybody else was getting on with it. Everybody else was moving on, doing their daily things, getting on with life, and I just found myself, I could almost say abandoned. I felt abandoned because there was nobody there for me, I thought, when I needed them. In fact, there was people there for me. I just didn't identify it at the time, but I know they're there.
Acknowledge the smallest triumph as a major victory. Don't wait until you're over the grief process before you pat yourself on the back. Commend yourself for the little things. Commend yourself every time you do something for the first time. Commend yourself when you get through that first birthday, that first anniversary, that first Christmas. It's a challenge. All of these little, everyday things that we've taken so much for granted, now they become quite massive, don't they? Commend yourself when you get through a Sunday or whatever your difficult day is. Commend yourself when you can look at a photograph and not burst into tears uncontrollably. Commend yourself when you realize, hey, I may not be over this yet, but I'm doing better. That is a major triumph.
Some of the hurdles that I foresee in the future will be getting through the rest of the year, reaching the anniversary of the first year anniversary of Stefan's death, rebuilding my relationship with my husband, finding the strength to still be a good mother to Julian and keep the fight going. One of the things that I have done since Stefan's died is that I've detached myself from the Cystic Fibrosis Foundation and from the fight because I felt that I had nothing to give to them. And one of my hurdles is going to be finding the inner strength to go back and to keep on fighting in spite of Stefan's death because of Julian. I felt that I failed, and I felt that I didn't have anything to offer them because he died. I felt I didn't have anything to offer other parents because he died. And part of my grieving is finding the good out of the bad.
I believe it's going to be a long road. I really don't believe it gets any easier, from my opinion, but I do believe you can learn to live with it from day to day and carry on.
In my journey of grief for 5 months, I have passed a lot of hurdles, and I'm sure that I have a lot more to pass. In fact, in Easter, my husband's nephew is having his daughter baptized, and as much as I want to go, I don't think I will, because my husband's nephews look very much like him, and there is 4 of them, and at the moment I don't feel I could. I don't think I could see them all together because they would remind me so much of him. And also one of his nephews is supposed to get married this year, and again, I don't know whether I'll be able to go to that. But people saying I should because I would get over that hurdle. That I will take in stride when the time comes.
We've got to hold on to hope. We've got to hold on to the hope that there is a future. We've got to hold on to the hope that we can come through this experience. We've got to hold on to hope that we will make it, even though this is one of the most difficult experiences of life. There's always hope, and we must never give up hope for ourselves and for our lives. But sometimes it's not so much hoping that we'll get through grief or hoping that a year from now. Sometimes holding on to hope is, I hope I can get through today. I hope I can get through this challenge. I hope I can get through this emotion. And if we do that, we will have come a long way in our grief journey.
I do believe you can get through it. It's hard. You might think like everything has ended, your world has ended, your life is finished, but it's not. You can, with a lot of hope, a lot of prayer, and a lot of love and support from family and friends, you can deal with it.
After the loss of someone we care about, life is different. Life will go on, but because your life was touched and changed by this individual, in many ways it will never be the same again. You will never forget the person or all that they have meant to you. Indeed, why should you? But now that person is in the past, and our challenge is to reorganize our lives in the present. We may not like it and wish things were different, but how can we find the resources and the strength to move into the future? Quite a number of years ago now, when I lived in a little rural village in southern Ontario, one of the tasks of Monday morning was to take the garbage down to the dump. And a good friend of mine used to come by in his truck, and we would load the garbage into his truck, and he and I would take it down to the dump, his garbage and my garbage. It was a wonderful opportunity to share with him and to have a social time, and we became very good friends. One day, we were driving along the path to the dump when suddenly he stopped the truck very suddenly. And he jumped out, and he ran about 50 yards over this earth-covered area and picked up this tangled, twisted mass of wood and metal and material. And he brought it back, and he threw it in the back of the truck. I didn't take too much notice. We went on our way, we dumped the garbage, we went back, we had our cup of coffee, and I went about my daily business. A number of weeks later, there was a knock on the back door of our house. And there stood my friend Journey. He said, "I have a gift for you." Sitting right beside him was a chair. It was beautifully finished with wood that was rich and warm, with upholstery. I said, "Journey, that's beautiful. That's wonderful." He started to laugh. He said, "You don't recognize it, do you?" I said, "Journey, if I had ever seen that chair before, I know I would recognize it." He said, "Remember the day we went to the dump? Remember that time I took that wood and that metal and that material and threw it in the back?" I said, "That was not the chair." He said, "It was." I'd like to show you the chair right now. This is the very chair. Someone took this chair, dirty, broken, twisted, and they threw it in the dump. But my friend, who was quite an expert at refinishing furniture, brought it home, cleaned up the wood, took the old stain and paint off it, beautifully stained and finished it, resprung it, recovered it. I thought, what a wonderful illustration of the grief process. Someone we care about dies. It feels like our life is over. It feels like we're finished. It feels like all we're good for is to be thrown on the dump. We feel broken. We feel twisted. We feel like life is over. The reality is that we can be restored. Our lives can be taken and reshaped and refinished. We can become beautiful again. It doesn't matter how much we feel that we've been damaged by the loss. There's not a single life that is beyond repair.
I'm not going to replace the person that was so large in my life, but I'm going to add to those memories that I've already got, and I'm going to create some new memories, and I'm not necessarily going to like it, but I'm going to make the best of it, and I'm going to do it. I don't forget about my wife, but I occupy my mind, and I build new memories, and I get more. I build a new audience. I lost my audience, and I'm building a new one.
I have learned personally that you just cannot take life for granted. You have to live life the way you choose to live it, because you just don't know when or how it's going to be taken from you. So you make the most of what you have and what you're left with. I believe after my accident, I believe that I'm making the most of what I have left, and live it the best way I can.
I don't think I'll ever put it to rest. I think she's always there in my memories. I still miss her, except the yearning or longing for her isn't nearly as bad as it was in the beginning. But I think my life has changed now, and the experience of losing her I've grown through it, and it's easier, but she'll always be a part of my life.
Sometimes I used to think I would just disintegrate with the pain, that I couldn't possibly go on living. It was just so unbearably painful. But somehow, even though the inside of me felt like it had died, the outside kept living. And almost like bulbs that are under the ground in winter, there was a regeneration and new life comes again, and I've learned that. I've also learned, I keep relearning it, that God does take care of us. Now, I haven't totally reconciled God stand dying, the biggest possible thing or person who looked after my children and I was taken away from us. But in little things, we have been well looked after, and it's just a constant reminder to me we'll be okay.
Life is a journey. We've been thinking about a particularly difficult stretch of that journey called grief. You may have experienced a significant loss, and it feels like a part of you is missing. Many of your hopes and dreams and expectations about the way life should be may seem shattered and broken. I'd like to encourage you. There is none of us at any time that is beyond repair. Viktor Frankl once said, "To live is to suffer. To survive is to find meaning in the suffering." In the days after Carolyn's death, there seemed to be very little comfort. One thing that did bring some solace was the verse in Psalm 23 that says, "Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me." Oh, don't worry. I'm not going to give you any cliches about the light at the end of the tunnel. I know this must be a very dark and difficult experience for you. But this verse reminds the grieving person of several important facts. The darkness is described as a shadow. Now, I don't know if you've ever thought about it, but you cannot have a shadow without there being a light somewhere, even though you may not be able to see that light right now. Also, it reminds us that we do not need to be alone in the valley. Whether you feel the comforting presence of God, or whether you share with friends or family or in a support group, you should not isolate yourself in this experience. You don't have to go it alone. And most important, the verse tells us you will come through the valley. The valley isn't a dead-end street. You don't get lost in the valley. You're not there forever. You come through. The grief journey has a beginning and an end. While the journey may be unpredictable, filled with many unexpected twists and turns, detours and diversions, there are many signposts and milestones to show us the way along this difficult road. I hope we've been able to help you put some of these things in perspective, perhaps even begin to find some meanings for the situation in which you find yourself. But it's not just the destination, it's the journey that's important. Sometimes we're in such a rush to get to the destination that we miss out on the sights and even the blessings of the journey. So take your time and appreciate that even though this time is difficult, it may have some learnings and insights along the way. As T.S. Eliot says, what we call the end is often the beginning, and to make an end is to make a beginning. The end is where we start from. And this applies so well to our grief journey. We shall not cease from exploring, and the end of our exploring will be to arrive where we started and know the place for the first time. I hope your grief journey from morning to dawn will lead you to the dawn of new beginnings.